Welcome to 1001 Nights of Sleep. It is related in the annals of the people of long ago, and in the histories of the great saints and kings, that there was once in the ancient dynasties of the Sassanid a king who was lord of the black earth and the white. He was a master of armies and guards, commanding 1,000 knights of steel and servants beyond counting. This king had 2 sons. Both were knights of great renown, brave and just. But the elder brother, Shahryar, was the greater of the 2. He inherited the kingdom of his father, and he ruled with equity and might over the vast islands of India and China. His younger brother, Shahzaman, became the king of the glittering city of Samarkand, deep in the lands of the Persians. For 20 years, the 2 brothers ruled in their separate lands. Their people prospered, their borders were safe, and they lived in the utmost enjoyment and delight. But as the wheel of time turned, the elder king, Shahryar, felt a deep longing in his heart to look upon his younger brother's face. He could wait no longer. He called for his Wazir, his most trusted counselor, and commanded him, "Go forth to the land of Samarkand. Go to my beloved brother, give him my greetings, and bring him to me. I long to see him." The Wazir bowed low. "I hear and I obey," he said. He made ready for the journey. He prepared the baggage and the camels. He gathered rich gifts, robes of silk, jewels of the deep earth, and horses of the finest Arabian breed. He traveled across the deserts and the wastes day and night until he reached the gates of Samarkand. King Shahzaman welcomed the messenger with honor. When he heard his brother's invitation, his heart filled with joy. He ordered his own camp to be prepared. He gathered his tents, his mules, his guards, and his treasures. He appointed his own chamberlain to rule the city in his absence, and set out towards the city of his brother. At midnight, the caravan was ready. The moon was high, casting long shadows across the dunes. But just as the drums signaled the departure, King Shahzaman remembered a necklace he had left in his palace, a gift intended for his brother. He returned alone to his castle. He walked through the silent halls, past the sleeping guards, and entered his private garden. But in the dim light of the hanging lanterns, he found a sight that shattered his soul. His wife, the queen, whom he loved above all others, was not alone. She was embraced in betrayal, conspiring in the darkness with a servant of the palace. The king stood frozen in the shadows. The world turned black before his eyes. He whispered to his own heart, "If this calamity can happen while I am yet within the borders of my city, while my tents are still visible from the walls, what will happen when I am far away in the lands of India?" Grief and rage overtook him. In a moment of madness and sorrow, he drew his scimitar and ended their treachery upon the silken rugs. He turned away, leaving the dead in the darkness, and mounted his horse. He rode out to the waiting caravan, his face pale as the moon. He gave the order to march. "Depart," he cried, and the camels moved forward into the vast, empty desert. But the king was a hollow man. He traveled in silence, neither eating nor drinking, consumed by the secret of the night. After many days of travel, they arrived at the majestic capital of King Shahryar. The city was decorated in their honor. The streets were hung with tapestries, and the people cheered. King Shahryar embraced his brother, happy to see him after 20 years. But he saw that Shahzaman was weak, his face yellow with sickness, his eyes haunted by shadows. He thought to himself, "Perhaps my brother is ill from the journey, or perhaps he misses his home." So he did not speak of it. Days passed. One morning, King Shahryar said, "Brother, let us go and hunt. The fresh air of the mountains will heal your spirit." But Shah Zaman shook his head. "Oh, my brother, my soul has no strength for the hunt. Leave me here, I pray you." So King Shahryar mounted his horse and rode out with his troops to the hunting grounds, leaving his brother alone in the palace of windows. Shah Zaman sat by the lattice window, looking down into the royal gardens. The trees were lush with fruit, and birds sang in the branches. But his heart was dead to beauty. As he watched, a secret gate in the garden wall opened. He saw the lady of the house, the wife of his great brother, walking into the garden. She was followed by 10 handmaidens, and behind them, from the shadows of the trees, came 10 men, servants of the estate. They threw off their disguises and laughed. They walked arm in arm, mocking the king who was away at the hunt. The queen herself called out to a man named Masudi, and they sat by the fountain, betraying the honor of the king in his own sanctuary. Shah Zaman watched in disbelief. He whispered, "By Allah, my misfortune is lighter than this. My brother is the king of the world, yet such treason lives in his very house. Compared to this, my sorrow is nothing." And strangely, his grief began to lift. He ate and he drank, and the color returned to his face. When King Shahryar returned from the hunt, he was amazed. "Brother," he cried, "your face is full of life. What has happened?" Shah Zaman replied, "I will tell you, but first, you must promise not to ask me the cause of my sickness, only the cause of my cure." Shahryar agreed. And so, Shah Zaman told him what he had seen in the garden. The great King Shahryar laughed in disbelief. "This cannot be. My queen is the soul of virtue. I must see this with my own eyes." And so, the next night, they feigned a departure for the hunt, but returned in secret, hiding in the shadows of the garden pavilion. And there, beneath the light of the stars, the truth was revealed. The garden filled with laughter and betrayal, just as the brother had said. King Shahryar felt his world crumble. He looked at his brother and said, "Let us leave this kingdom. Let us abandon our thrones. We shall wander the earth as common travelers until we find one person, just one whose misfortune is greater than ours. Only then shall we return." And so the 2 kings, lords of the East, walked out of the city gates by night, with nothing but the clothes on their backs. They traveled through the days and the nights, crossing deserts where no bird flies, and climbing mountains that touch the clouds. They did not stop until they reached the edge of the rolling salt sea. There, they found a white sandy beach and a massive tree, standing alone against the tide. A spring of fresh water bubbled at its roots. The kings drank from the spring and climbed high into the branches of the tree to hide themselves and rest. But the silence of the afternoon was soon broken. The ocean began to churn. The waves parted, and a black pillar of smoke rose to the heavens, swirling like a storm. The kings trembled in the branches, fearing that the day of judgment had come. From the smoke emerged a Jinni, a giant of ancient times, broad of chest and terrible to behold. On his head, he carried a large glass chest, secured with 4 heavy locks of steel. The Jinni stepped onto the beach and sat beneath the very tree where the kings were hiding. He unlocked the chest with 4 keys, and from it, he lifted a woman. She was of surpassing beauty, like the sun shining in a clear sky. The Jinni looked at her and said, "O Lady of the Universe, O perfection of all things, I wish to sleep." He placed his massive head upon her lap, and soon The sound of his breathing shook the ground like thunder. He was asleep. The woman looked up into the branches of the tree. She saw the two kings clinging to the leaves. She lifted the Jinni's head gently from her lap, placed it on the sand, and stood up. She signaled to the kings, "Come down and do not make a sound, or I will wake this demon, and he will destroy you." Terrified, the kings descended from the tree. They stood before her, humbled by her presence. The woman looked at them and whispered, "I demand a token from each of you. Give me a ring from your fingers." Confused, but afraid to refuse, Shahryar and Shahzaman took off their royal signet rings and placed them in her hand. The woman smiled. She reached into the folds of her silk robe and pulled out a necklace. It was strung with 98 rings of all kinds, gold, silver, and ruby. She added their 2 rings to the string, making it 100. She said to them, "Do you know what these are? These are the rings of 100 men. This Jinni stole me on my wedding night and locked me in a glass chest at the bottom of the sea. He heaped waves upon waves over me, thinking he could keep me from the world. But he does not know that when a woman desires something, no chain and no ocean can stand in her way. These rings are proof that his power is an illusion." The kings were struck dumb with amazement. They looked at the sleeping giant, so powerful he could crush mountains, yet so easily deceived in his sleep. King Shahryar whispered to his brother, "O Shahzaman, this Jinni is a creature of magic and fire, yet his misfortune is greater than ours. Come, let us return to our kingdoms. For if this can happen to a demon, we should not despair." And so they returned. But when King Shahryar entered his capital, the shadow returned to his heart. He summoned his Wazir and gave a terrible command regarding his queen and the servants. The deed was done, and the palace was plunged into silence. But the king's anger was not satisfied. A dark madness took hold of him. He swore a vow by the ancient laws that he would never again be betrayed by a woman. He commanded his Wazir, "Every night you shall bring me a new bride, and every morning before the sun rises you shall take her life. For there is no truth left in the world, and I shall purge the land of betrayal." The Wazir wept, but he could not disobey. And so began the years of shadow. Every night a daughter was taken. Every morning a family wept. The city emptied as fathers fled with their children to the deserts and the wilds, escaping the king's decree. Now, Wazir, who carried this heavy burden, had 2 daughters of his own. The elder was named Scheherazade, and the younger was named Dunyazad. Scheherazade was wise beyond her years. She had read the books, the annals, and the legends of preceding kings. She knew the stories of the poets and the words of the sages. She was as learned as she was beautiful. One day, she saw her father's grief. She said to him, "Father, why are you so burdened?" The poet says, "Tell the one who is sorrowful that grief does not last forever. Tell me what troubles you." The Wazir looked at his daughter and told her of the king's vow and how the people were suffering. Scheherazade stood tall. Her voice was calm. "Father, I wish for you to give me to the king. Either I shall live and become a ransom for the daughters of the Muslims, or I shall die, and my name will be remembered." The Wazir cried out in horror, "Oh, my daughter, have you lost your mind? Do not do this. I fear for you, lest the same fate befall you that befell the bull and the ass." Scheherazade asked, "And what happened to the bull and the ass, father?" The Wazir sat down and began to tell the tale. Know, O my daughter, that there was once a wealthy merchant. He owned lands and herds of cattle, and this merchant was gifted by Allah with the ability to understand the language of beasts and birds. One day, the merchant sat in his barn, listening to the animals. In one stall stood a bull, strong and hard-working. In the next stall stood an asp, a donkey fresh and rested. The bull looked at the donkey and said, "How lucky you are. I work hard from dawn until dusk, plowing the heavy earth and turning the millstone. I am tired and my neck is sore. But you are brushed and groomed. You do nothing but carry the master on short rides and rest on clean straw. I envy you." The donkey, wishing to be helpful, replied to the bull, "O bull, you are too honest. You kill yourself with work. Listen to me, and you shall find rest. When the plowman comes for you in the morning, lie down, puff out your belly, pretend to be sick. Refuse to eat. They will think you are ill, and they will leave you to rest." The merchant heard all of this and smiled. The next morning, the bull did exactly as the donkey had advised. He lay on the ground, groaning, and refused to eat his fodder. The plowman was worried and went to the merchant. "O master, the bull is sick. He cannot work today." The merchant, who knew the trick, nodded wisely. He said, "If the bull is sick, then take the donkey. Yoke him to the plow, and make him do the bull's work for the entire day." And so, the donkey, who had given the advice, was dragged out into the field. He pulled the heavy plow from sunrise to sunset. His back ached, his hooves were cracked, and his neck was raw from the yoke. When he returned to the barn that evening, he was nearly dead with exhaustion. The bull, who had rested all day, stood up and said, "O donkey, you are a true friend. Thanks to your advice, I have rested and eaten. I shall do the same thing tomorrow." But the donkey, realizing his mistake, whispered, "O bull, I heard the master say that if you are still sick tomorrow, he will give you to the butcher to be slaughtered." The bull was terrified. "I am cured. I am cured," he cried. And so the bull went back to work, and the donkey saved his own neck. The Wazir looked at Scheherazade and said, "My daughter, you are the donkey. You sit here in safety, yet you wish to intervene in the king's madness. If you go to him, you will take the burden upon yourself, and you will perish." But Scheherazade was not swayed. She replied, "Father, your words are wise, but my mind is made up. Even if I must suffer like the donkey, I must try to save the people. Take me to him." Seeing that he could not change her heart, the Wazir rose and went to prepare the wedding clothes, weeping as he went. When the Wazir heard these words from his daughter and saw that she would not yield, he bowed his head in submission to fate. He rose from his cushion, his heart heavy as a stone, and went forth to prepare the bridal gear. It was a wedding unlike any other. There were no drums, no flutes, and no feasting in the streets. The city was silent, for the people believed that Scheherazade, the flower of the city, would be dead before the sun rose. While the women of the household wept, Scheherazade went quietly to her younger sister, Dunyazad. She took her hands and whispered the plan that would save them all. "Listen well, my sister," she said. "When I go to the king tonight, I will send for you. When you come to the chamber and you see that the king has finished with me and is resting, you must speak. You must say to me, 'O my sister, if you are not sleepy, Tell us one of your lovely little tales to while away the waking hours of the night. Scheherazade squeezed her sister's hand. Do not forget this, for upon this simple request hangs my life, your life, and the lives of all the daughters of the Muslims. Dunyazad nodded, her eyes wide with fear and determination. I will do exactly as you say, she promised. As the sun set, painting the sky in colors of blood and gold, the Wazir took his daughter by the hand and led her up the steps of the royal palace. They entered the king's chamber. King Shahryar sat upon his high divan, his face like a mask of iron. He looked at the Wazir and then at the maiden. The king asked, Have you brought me the sacrifice? The Wazir, unable to look the king in the eye, bowed low and said, I have brought her, O king of age. But as the king approached her, Scheherazade began to weep. Tears flowed down her cheeks like pearls. The king paused. He had seen many women weep before their end, but there was a strange dignity in her sorrow. He asked, What ails you? Scheherazade replied, O king, I have a younger sister, Dunyazad. We have never been parted. I desire that you send for her, so that I may bid her farewell before the morning comes. The king, feeling a flicker of curiosity, granted the request. He signaled to the guards, and Dunyazad was brought into the royal apartment. The night deepened. The candles burned low, casting long shadows against the marble walls. The king, satisfied with his new bride, eventually lay back upon the cushions, but sleep did not come easily to him. His mind was dark, haunted by the betrayals of the past. Scheherazade lay awake, watching the moon trace its path across the sky. Near the foot of the bed, on a carpet of silk, lay Dunyazad, waiting for the signal. The silence of the palace was heavy. The only sound was the breathing of the king and the distant call of the night watchman. Finally, as the night began to turn toward the day, but before the dawn had broken, Dunyazad sat up. She cleared her throat softly and spoke into the darkness. Oh, my sister, sleep has fled from my eyes. The night is long and heavy. If you are not asleep, I pray you, tell us one of your pleasant stories to pass the time until the morning prayer. Scheherazade turned her head toward the king. She spoke softly, her voice like a cool breeze in the heat of the night. I will tell a tale gladly, if this auspicious king permits me. King Shahryar, who was lying awake and whose heart was restless, turned to her. He remembered the stories she was famous for, the chronicles of old and the legends of the past. He nodded in the darkness. Tell on, he said. Let us hear your story. And so, Scheherazade sat up. She smoothed her robes, took a breath, and began to weave the web that would save the world. She did not speak of herself. She did not speak of the fear of death. Instead, she transported them to another place and another time. She began, It is related, O king, that there was once a merchant who possessed abundant wealth and traveled to many lands. It is told, O king, in the stories of long ago, that there was once a merchant who had great wealth. He owned much land, merchandise, and gold, and he had many employees who worked for him. He was a man who traveled often, buying and selling goods in many different countries. One day, he needed to travel to a distant land to collect some money that was owed to him. He prepared for the journey with care. He packed his saddlebags with flatbread and dried dates to eat along the way. He filled a leather skin with fresh water. Then he mounted his horse and set off into the desert. For many days and nights he traveled. He crossed empty plains and climbed rocky hills. Finally, he finished his business in the distant city and began the long journey home. On the fourth day of his return trip, the heat became unbearable. The sun beat down on the desert sand until it felt like a hammer of gold. The air was thick and hot, and there was no wind to cool his face. Feeling exhausted, the merchant looked for a place to rest. In the distance, he saw a patch of green. It was an oasis, a garden in the middle of the wasteland. In the center of the oasis stood a massive walnut tree, its branches spreading wide to offer thick shade. Beneath the tree, a spring of clear, cool water bubbled up from the earth. The merchant sighed with relief. He guided his horse to the tree and tied it to a sturdy branch. He sat down by the spring and splashed the cool water on his face and hands. Then he opened his bag and took out a handful of dried dates. He ate the dates one by one. They were sweet and satisfying. As he finished each date, he took the hard wooden stone from the center and threw it far away. He threw one stone to the left and another to the right, enjoying his meal in the quiet peace of the desert. But just as he finished, something terrifying happened. The air suddenly grew cold. The sunlight seemed to dim. From the ground in front of him, a massive cloud of dust and smoke spiraled up into the sky. The column of smoke grew taller and wider until it blocked out the sun. From the center of the smoke stepped a gigantic Jinni. He was a creature of immense size and terrifying power. In his hand, he held a massive sword that gleamed with a deadly light. His eyes burned like glowing coals, and his voice shook the ground like thunder. He walked straight toward the trembling merchant, raised his sword high, and roared, "Stand up! Stand up so that I may kill you, just as you killed my son." The merchant shook with fear. His face turned pale, and his teeth began to chatter. He looked up at the giant and stammered, "But, my lord, for what crime do you wish to kill me? I have done nothing wrong. I have never seen your son, and I certainly have not killed him." The Jinni roared again. "Do not lie to me. Did you not just sit under this tree? Did you not take dates from your bag and eat them? And when you were finished, did you not throw the hard stones to the left and to the right?" The merchant nodded, tears filling his eyes. "Yes, my lord. I did exactly that. I cannot deny it." "Then you have confessed your crime," the Jinni shouted. "When you threw that last stone, my son was walking past you. He is invisible to human eyes, so you did not see him. The stone struck him in the chest with great force, and he died instantly. Therefore, by the ancient law of blood for blood, I must take your life in return." The merchant fell to his knees. "Oh, spirit of the flame, have mercy. I did not know. It was an accident. Surely you cannot execute a man for a mistake he did not know he made? There is no power and no strength except in God, the Almighty. Please spare me." But the Jinni was cold and unmoving. He grabbed the merchant by the collar of his robe and dragged him across the sand. He forced the merchant to the ground and raised the sword high, ready to strike the fatal blow. The merchant looked at the gleaming blade and realized his end was near. He began to weep for his life, for his wife, and for his children. In his grief, he spoke out loud about the cruelty of fate. He said, "Life has 2 days, one day of safety and one day of fear. Life is only a loan that we are given, and death is the creditor who comes to collect. We build our hopes high, but destiny tears them down. Why does fate treat us this way? It attacks us when we least expect it, like a storm that destroys a garden." The merchant continued to beg, "Spare me. Think of my family." But the Jinni only tightened his grip. "It is no use. the giant said. "Even if you wept tears of blood, it would not change my mind. My son is dead because of you, and the law demands a life for a life. Prepare yourself." Seeing that there was no escape, the merchant stopped struggling. He took a deep breath and looked the Jinni in the eye. "O King of the Spirits," he said softly, "if you must kill me, then grant me one last wish. It is a small request for a being as powerful as you." The Jinni paused. "What is it?" "I have debts that I need to pay," the merchant explained. "I have money that belongs to other people, and I have property that must be returned to its owners. I also have a wife and young children who depend on me. If you kill me right now, my wealth will be lost, my debts will go unpaid, and my children will starve in the streets. That would be a second crime." The merchant continued, "Let me return to my home one last time. Give me time to pay my debts, write my will, and say goodbye to my family. I promise you I will wrap up all my affairs. Then I will return to this exact spot on New Year's Day. I will sit under this tree and wait for you, and you can take my life then. I swear this by the God who created both of us." The Jinni looked at the small human. He saw the sincerity in his eyes. "Do you swear a binding oath that you will come back?" the Jinni asked. "Do you swear that you will return to your death willingly?" "I swear it," the merchant said. "I pledge my honor and my soul on it." The Jinni lowered his sword. "Very well. I accept your covenant. I give you exactly 1 year. But remember, if you do not return, I will find you, and I will destroy not just you, but your entire house. I will be here," the merchant promised. With a sound like rushing wind, the Jinni vanished into the air, leaving the merchant alone in the quiet orchard. The merchant sat for a moment, shaking uncontrollably. Then he slowly stood up, mounted his horse, and rode away. But unlike his journey out, his journey home was filled with a heavy sadness. When the merchant finally arrived at his home, his wife and children ran to greet him. They were full of joy to see him safe. But when they looked at his face, their smiles faded. He looked pale, thin, and haunted. His wife took his hand. "Husband, what is wrong? Why do you look so sorrowful?" The merchant gathered his family around him. He told them everything. He told them about the oasis, the date stone, the invisible son of the Jinni, and the terrible promise he had made to return and die. When they heard this, a great cry of grief filled the house. His wife wept and cut her hair in mourning. His daughters cried out in fear. His young sons clung to his legs, begging him not to go back. It was a house of mourning, even though the father was still alive. But the merchant was a man of his word. He knew he could not break his vow. He spent the next year setting his affairs in order. He paid every single coin he owed to others. He returned goods to his partners. He gave generous gifts to the poor to purify his soul. He wrote a detailed will, dividing his property fairly among his children so they would be cared for after he was gone. He freed his slaves and gave them money to start new lives. He spent every moment he could with his children, memorizing their faces. Finally, the year came to an end. The new year was approaching. The merchant washed himself and put on his burial shroud, a simple white cloth, underneath his traveling clothes. He called his family together for the final farewell. The scene was heartbreaking. His children held on to him, crying, "Father, do not leave us. Do not go to the demon." But the merchant gently pulled away. "My children," he said, tears running down his cheeks, "this is the will of fate. Man cannot escape his destiny. I made a promise, and I must keep it. He kissed them one last time, mounted his horse, and rode out of the city gates. He did not look back, for he knew if he did, he might not have the strength to leave. He traveled across the desert until he reached the oasis on New Year's Day. He found the walnut tree and the bubbling spring. It was quiet and peaceful, just as it had been a year ago. He sat down on the soft ground, folded his hands, and waited for the sun to set. He waited for the Jinni to come and end his life. As he sat there, consumed by sadness, he saw an old man walking toward him on the desert road. This old man was leading a beautiful gazelle on a silver chain. The old man approached the merchant and bowed. "Peace be upon you, my friend," the old man said. "Why are you sitting all alone in this desolate place? Do you not know that this oasis is haunted by demons and spirits?" The merchant wiped his eyes and told the old man his sad story, from the date stone to the death sentence. The old man with the gazelle was amazed. "By God," he said, "you are a man of true faith. Anyone else would have run away, but you returned to face your death just to keep your word. This is a wondrous story. I swear I will not leave this spot. I will sit with you until I see what happens between you and this Jinni." So the old man sat down beside the merchant. A short time later, a second old man approached. He was leading 2 black dogs. He greeted them and asked why they were sitting in such a dangerous place. When he heard the story, he too was astonished. "I must see the end of this," he said, and he sat down. Finally, a third old man approached, leading a mule. He heard the tale and joined the group. And so, the 3 sheikhs and the sorrowful merchant sat together under the tree, watching the horizon, waiting for the dust and the smoke that would bring death. The sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the desert sky in shades of deep purple and bruised orange. The merchant and the 3 old men sat under the walnut tree in heavy silence, watching the shadows lengthen across the sand. Suddenly, the wind died. The air became thick and still. From the open desert, a whirlwind of dust appeared. It spun violently, moving closer and closer until it reached the edge of the oasis. The dust settled, revealing a massive cloud of smoke. From the smoke stepped the Jinni. He was exactly as the merchant remembered, huge, terrifying, and holding a drawn sword that glimmered with a sharp, cold light. His eyes sparked with magical fire as he scanned the group. He ignored the 3 old men and walked straight to the merchant. He reached out a hand like a tree trunk and grabbed the merchant by the arm. "Stand up," the Jinni roared, his voice shaking the leaves of the walnut tree. "Stand up so I may kill you. You have kept your promise and returned, and now I must fulfill my vow to take your life in exchange for my son's life." The merchant began to weep, his tears falling onto the dry earth. He cried out for mercy, but the Jinni began to drag him toward the open sand. The 3 old men rose to their feet. They too began to weep and wail, their voices filled with grief for this stranger who was about to die. But the first old man, the one who held the beautiful gazelle on a silver chain, stepped forward. His face was wet with tears, but his voice was steady. He bowed low before the giant spirit and said, "O king of the jinns and crown of the kings of the spirits, please listen to me." The Jinni paused, his sword hovering in the air. He looked down at the frail human. The old man continued, "If I tell you my story, and the story of this gazelle that is with me, and if you find it to be a truly wonderful and strange tale, stranger than anything you have ever heard, will you grant me a gift? Will you spare 1/3 of this merchant's life? Will you give up 1/3 of your claim on his blood?" The Jinni thought for a moment. He looked at the old man, then at the trembling merchant, and finally at the gazelle, who looked back with sad, intelligent eyes. Very well, the Jinni rumbled. If your story is indeed strange and full of wonder, I will grant you 1/3 of his blood. The old man sat down on the ground. He pulled the gazelle close to him, stroked her soft fur, and began his tale. Know, O great Jinni, that this gazelle you see here is not a wild animal. She is my wife. She is my cousin, the daughter of my uncle, and I married her when she was very young. We lived together for 30 years in peace and prosperity. I was a merchant like this man here, and I gave her everything she desired. Fine silks, jewelry, and a comfortable home. But there was one shadow over our happiness. God did not bless us with children. My wife was barren. I desired a son to carry my name and inherit my wealth. And so, after many years, I took a concubine into my house. By the grace of the Almighty, this concubine became pregnant, and in due time she gave birth to a son. He was a beautiful boy, with a face as bright as the full moon. I loved him more than my own life. As the boy grew, my wife, this gazelle, watched him with eyes full of darkness. Jealousy began to grow in her heart like a poisonous weed. She hated the boy, and she hated his mother, but she kept this hatred hidden deep inside her, smiling on the outside while plotting on the inside. When my son reached the age of 15, I had to travel to a distant city for my business. It was a long journey that would keep me away for many months. I called my wife to me and said, I am leaving my son and his mother in your care. Watch over them and keep them safe until I return. She promised me she would, but her heart was full of deceit. No sooner had I left the city than my wife began to study the dark arts. She learned the secrets of sorcery and magic. She brewed potions and recited ancient spells that should never be spoken. One day, she took my son out into a field. She cast a spell upon him, sprinkling him with enchanted water. In an instant, his human form vanished, and he was transformed into a calf. She then went to the boy's mother, my concubine, and cast the same spell, turning her into a cow. She handed them both over to the herdsman who watched my cattle. She told him, take these 2 animals and put them with the rest of the herd. Watch them, but do not treat them with any special care. And so my beloved son and his mother were forced to live as beasts, eating grass in the fields. Many months later, I returned from my journey. I rushed to my house, eager to see my family. I asked my wife, where is my son? And where is his mother? My wife, this gazelle, began to weep false tears. She said, Oh, my husband, a terrible tragedy has happened. Your concubine caught a sudden fever and died. As for your son, he ran away from the house a month ago, and we have heard no news of him. My heart broke. I grieved for my son and his mother for a full year. I did not know that they were right outside in my own pasture. When the great festival of sacrifice arrived, I sent word to my herdsman. I told him, bring me a fat cow for the sacrifice, so that we may feed the poor and honor the day. The herdsman brought me a cow, the very one that was my concubine. When I stepped forward with a knife, the cow did something strange. She broke away from the herdsman and ran to me. She rubbed her head against my robes and began to make low, mournful sounds. Tears, real human tears, streamed from her eyes. I was struck with a sudden, overwhelming pity. I felt a weight in my chest. I turned to the herdsman and said, take this cow away. I cannot kill her. Her tears have moved my heart. Bring me another. But my wife cried out, what are you doing? This is the best and fattest cow in the herd. We must sacrifice her for the holy day. Do not be weak. I tried to argue, but she insisted. However, my heart would not allow me to do it. I ordered the herdsman to take the cow away and slaughter her himself, for I could not bear to watch. Later, the herdsman came to me, looking confused. "Master," he said, "that cow was strange. When we slaughtered her, we found no meat on her bones. She was nothing but skin and bone, as if she had died of grief from the inside. I regretted it deeply, but the deed was done." Then my wife said, "We still need a sacrifice. Slaughter this calf." She pointed to my son. The herdsman brought the calf to me. When the calf saw me, he snapped his rope. He ran to me and threw himself at my feet. He rubbed his face against my sandals and wailed and wept with a voice that sounded almost like a human child crying. My heart melted completely. I dropped the knife. "I will not sacrifice this calf," I declared. "Take him away and keep him safe. Treat him with kindness." My wife was furious. "You must sacrifice him," she demanded. "He is fat and perfect for the feast." But this time I stood firm. "I will not do it," I said. "I will not listen to you." I sent the calf away with the herdsman. The next day, I was sitting alone in my room, full of sorrow. The herdsman came running to the house. He bowed and said, "Oh, master, I have good news. I have a daughter who has studied the mystic arts since she was a child. Today, when she saw the calf you spared, she covered her face and laughed. But then she looked at the calf again and wept." I asked, "Why did she laugh and weep?" She laughed. The herdsman said, "Because she saw that the calf is actually your son, transformed by magic. And she wept because his mother was the cow that was slaughtered yesterday." When I heard this, the world spun around me. I rushed to the herdsman's house. "Oh, maiden," I cried, "if you can restore my son, I will give you all my cattle and all my wealth." She smiled and said, "Oh, master, I do not want your wealth. I ask for only two things. First, let me marry your son. And second, let me punish the one who did this dark deed." I agreed instantly. The maiden took a brass bowl and filled it with water. She whispered ancient words over it until the water bubbled. She sprinkled the water over the calf and said, "If you were created by God as a calf, stay as you are. But if you are under a spell, return to your true shape." The calf shook violently. In a flash of light, the animal form melted away, and my son stood before me, a handsome young man. I embraced him, and we wept together. Then the maiden turned to my wife. She said, "For your envy and your cruelty, you shall take the form of a beast." She cast the water upon her, and my wife was instantly transformed into this gazelle you see here. The old man looked up at the Jinni. "That is my story. I have traveled with this gazelle ever since, keeping her on this chain. Is this not a strange and wondrous tale?" The massive Jinni nodded slowly. "It is indeed a strange tale," the Jinni rumbled. "I grant you 1/3 of the merchant's blood." The first old man sighed with relief. But the merchant was not safe yet. 2/3 of his life still belonged to the sword. Then the second old man, the one leading the 2 black dogs, stood up. The massive Jinni stood silently, waiting. He had granted 1/3 of the merchant's life, but the sword still hovered, hungry for the rest. The second old man, the one holding the leashes of the 2 black dogs, stepped forward into the moonlight. He was frail, but his eyes were sharp with a memory of his suffering. "O Lord of the Kings of the Spirits," the old man said, "if I tell you my story and the true history of these 2 dogs, and if you find it even more amazing than the story of the gazelle, Will you grant me 1/3 of this man's blood?" The Jinni's eyes glowed. "I agree. Tell your tale." The old man began. "Know, O Jinni, that these 2 dogs you see here are my own brothers. I am the youngest of 3. When our father passed away, may he rest in peace, he left us a large inheritance. We each received 1,000 gold pieces to start our own lives. My 2 brothers were eager to see the world. They took their money and traveled to distant lands to trade, but they were foolish and lacked discipline. They spent their wealth on fine clothes, expensive food, and idle pleasures. A year later, a beggar came to my shop. His clothes were rags, and his face was dirty. I did not recognize him until he spoke. It was my eldest brother. He had lost everything. I did not scold him. Instead, I took him to the bathhouse, gave him fresh clothes, and said, "Do not worry, brother. My wealth is your wealth." I calculated my profits for the year and gave him 500 gold pieces so he could start again. Not long after, my second brother returned in the same condition, broke and barefoot. Again, I welcomed him with open arms and gave him 500 gold pieces. We lived together for a while, but soon the wanderlust took hold of them again. They urged me to travel with them. "Let us take a great voyage," they said. "We will double our wealth." I resisted at first, but eventually I agreed. I sold my shop and my goods, gaining 6,000 gold pieces. I buried half of it in the garden for safety, and with the other half I bought merchandise and rented a large ship. My brothers, having wasted their money again, came with nothing, but I provided for them. We set sail across the great ocean. We traveled for days and nights, trading in ports and seeing the wonders of the world. One day, we docked at a bustling city. As I walked along the shore, a poor woman approached me. She was dressed in tattered clothes, but her voice was gentle. She begged me, "Oh, master, take me with you. Marry me and treat me with kindness, and I will be a blessing to you." My heart was moved by pity. I agreed to her request. I clothed her in the finest silks, married her, and brought her onto the ship. As we continued our voyage, I grew to love her deeply for her kindness and wisdom. But my brothers grew jealous. They looked at my wealth, my successful trades, and my happiness with my new wife, and their hearts turned black with envy. One dark night, while we were in the middle of the ocean, they held a secret council. "Let us kill him," they whispered. "We will take his wealth and divide it between us." While my wife and I were sleeping on the deck under the stars, my brothers crept up beside us. Before I could wake, they seized us both and threw us over the railing into the churning dark sea. I hit the cold water and sank. I was sure that death had come for me, but suddenly I felt strong arms around me. My wife caught me before I could drown, but she did not swim like a human. She carried me through the water as easily as a bird flies through the air. She brought me to the shore of a desert island and set me down gently. Then she changed. The tattered woman I had married vanished. In her place stood a being of radiant power. She floated above the sand, her eyes glowing with supernatural light. She spoke, and her voice was like the wind. "Oh, my husband, I am of the Jinn. I saw your kindness on the docks, and I loved you for it. I have saved you from the water, and now I must go to the ship. I will sink it and drown your wicked brothers for what they have done." I fell to my knees and pleaded with her. "Oh, my love, do not kill them. They are my brothers. They are flesh of my flesh." The wise man says, "Be kind to those who hurt you, for kindness is the greatest revenge." She was angry, for the Jinn are passionate creatures, But she listened to my plea. "For your sake, I will spare their lives," she said. "But they must be punished." She lifted me into the air and flew me back to my home city in the blink of an eye. She brought me to my house, where I dug up the gold I had buried. But when I went to my door, I found these two black dogs tied to a post. My wife appeared one last time. She said, "I have transformed your brothers into these beasts. They shall remain in this form for 10 years, to learn the humility they lacked as men." She told me that if I ever needed to break the spell after 10 years, I must travel to this specific oasis. The old man looked up at the giant Jinni holding the sword. "The 10 years have just passed. I was on my way to find her when I met this merchant." That is my story. The Jinni nodded slowly, impressed. "It is a wondrous tale of betrayal and mercy," he said. "I grant you 1/3 of the merchant's blood." Now, 2/3 of the merchant's life had been saved, but 1/3 still remained. The third old man, the one who was leading the mule, stepped forward. "O King of the Spirits," he said, "is my story not worth the final third of this man's life? Listen to the tale of this mule." The Jinni nodded. "Speak." "Know, O Jinni, that this mule was once my wife. When I married her, I trusted her completely. But one day, I came home early from my work. I entered the house quietly and found her with a strange man. They were plotting against me. When she saw me, she did not apologize. Instead, she grabbed a cup of water and began to chant a spell in a language I did not understand. She splashed the water in my face and shouted, 'Leave this human shape and become a dog.' In an instant, I fell to my hands and knees. I tried to speak, but I could only bark. I ran out of the house in terror, chased away by her and her lover. I wandered the streets as a stray dog, hungry and afraid. Eventually, I stopped in front of a butcher's shop. The butcher threw me a bone, and I wagged my tail in thanks. He took a liking to me and let me stay in his shop. One day, the butcher's daughter came into the shop. When she saw me, she covered her face with her veil. "Father," she cried, "why do you bring a strange man into the shop where I am?" The butcher was confused. "There is no man here, only this dog." "That is no dog," she said. "That is a man who has been enchanted by a wicked woman. I can see through the spell." The butcher was amazed. He asked his daughter, "Can you help him?" She nodded. She took a bowl of water, whispered over it, and sprinkled it on me. "Return to your true form," she commanded. I felt a strange shiver, and suddenly I was a man again. I stood up and thanked the butcher and his daughter with tears in my eyes. The daughter then gave me a small vial of enchanted water. She said, "Go home. When your wife is asleep, sprinkle this on her and speak your wish." I returned to my house that night. I crept into the room where my wife lay sleeping. I sprinkled the water on her and said, "Leave this human shape and become a mule." She woke up screaming, but her voice changed into a bray. She transformed into the mule you see here. I put a bridle on her and have kept her ever since to remind her of her treachery. The old man finished his story and looked at the Jinni. "Is this not strange?" The Jinni sheathed his sword with a loud clang. "It is indeed," he said. "I grant you the final third of the merchant's life." The Jinni turned to the merchant, who was kneeling on the sand, hardly daring to breathe. "O human," the Jinni rumbled. "You have been saved by the stories of these 3 faithful friends. Because of them, I release you from your debt. My son is dead, but your death will not bring him back. Go in peace." With a sound like a cracking thunderbolt, the huge Jinni turned into smoke and dissolved into the night sky, vanishing forever. The merchant fell to the ground, weeping with relief. He embraced the old man with a gazelle, the old man with the dogs, and the old man with the mule. He thanked them 1,000 times, for they had saved him from certain doom. They sat together under the walnut tree until the morning sun rose, sharing food and water. Then they each went their separate ways. The merchant returned to his family, where he lived a life of gratitude and joy until he was visited by the destroyer of delights and the severer of societies, death itself. But the king was not satisfied. As the sun rose over the palace, King Shahryar looked at Scheherazade. He had intended to kill her that morning, but his mind was burning with curiosity. By Allah, the king said, this story was strange and beautiful. Scheherazade smiled gently. O king, this is nothing compared to the story I could tell you tomorrow night, if I am allowed to live. It is the story of the fisherman and the Jinni, a tale of a copper bottle, a trapped demon, and a king whose body was half stone. The king thought to himself, I will spare her one more night just to hear this tale. And so, the first night ended,